Hi, you're watching Moneycontrol and this is Shweta Punj. We are in conversation with Mr. Amitabh Kant, India's Sherpa to G20 and of course one of India's star bureaucrats who has been responsible for driving and executing several of India's flagship programs, be it Make in India, be it Startup India, or of course we all remember Incredible India. Mr. Kant, thank you so much. Pleasure to be speaking with you at the Sushma Swaraj Bhavan, and thank you for taking out the time. Congratulations on the book. This is the book, which is why we are here to have this conversation with you. But I want to begin by asking you about the G20 deliberations so far. India is the host country. We've had a whole host of meetings, including hosting central bankers and finance ministers recently. If you were to take a view so far, what's your assessment of the G20 meetings that have happened?
So Shweta, thanks a lot. Wonderful interacting with you always. We've had about close to 40 odd meetings so far. So if you look at the G20, we have to look at it in the context of what has transpired in terms of content, which we are very happy with. We've got through a lot of content on the finance track. We've got through a lot of content on the finance minister and the foreign minister's meeting. We've been able to get a lot out in many other working groups, and we've so far executed our G20 presidency not as merely an official meeting but as a people's G20. We've taken it out to all the states and several cities. So cities have got a facelift. The drainage, sewage, solid waste all have got improved, and I think there's been a huge impact in terms of that, and so far so good.
Okay, so for instance, the Bangalore meeting, it was a challenge to come to a joint statement and which could not be released. So do you think that the war has complicated things when it comes to building consensus amongst the G20 countries?
No, there is a complexity. We are living in very turbulent times. There's a big upheaval across the world. You have a war going on for about over a year, and the scenario is, in terms of geopolitics, is not particularly pleasing. G7 comprises of both the G7 and the emerging markets in Russia and China, and therefore there is a challenge. But we are very hopeful. We are very positive, we are very optimistic. Last year in Indonesia, we had 17 meetings without a communique, and finally in the last round for the Leaders Summit, we were able to get a fairly positive and progressive communique out, and we are very hopeful that we will negotiate with everybody. We will bring multilateralism front foot, and we will bring everybody to the table and take this forward.
Right. So India finds itself in a very tricky spot. We have fairly good relations with Russia, and there is pressure from the world for us to take a stern view with Russia. Any indications, Mr. Kant, on how India will walk this tightrope walk, because it will be a very tough one. You have China on one side, you have the war, and India has its own allies, India has its own relationships that it has to lean on. So any indications on what can we expect?
So there is a complexity. You have, if you look at the present global scenario, you have almost 1/3 of the world in recession at the moment. 75 countries of the world are facing a global debt crisis. You have a scenario of very adverse position on global action and global finance. You have a scenario where 200 million people have gone below poverty line because of COVID. 100 million people have lost their jobs. You also have a scenario of a war going on for over a year.
Right.
With a huge impact on food, fuel, fertilizer. You also have the present, on top of it all, the present scenario of the Silicon Valley Bank and many other banks getting impacted in America. And therefore, the G20 can't be held back because of one issue, and that is the war in Europe. We have to take care of the vast number of people who've been impacted by poverty, impacted by global debt, impacted by COVID, impact on education and health. And therefore, our view is that for the rest of the world, G20 is very important because it comprises of 85% of the global GDP and 78% of the global trade. And it's incumbent on all the leaders of the world when they meet to take care of the challenges which the population of the world is facing. And therefore, despite the complexity of the war, we need to move ahead on climate action. We need to move ahead on sustainable development goals. We need to move ahead on digital transformation. We need to make progress on a whole range of issues which are critical, including women-led development, which is one of our key priorities. And therefore, our view is that a single issue should not hold up the progress and development of the world, particularly of the global south.
Okay. What is India's key agenda, and what are the key areas that India wants to focus on through this, the outcome that India is hopeful for at the end of these meetings?
So, India's priorities are the priorities for the world when India takes over the leadership, and that's about driving inclusive, resilient and sustainable growth, which is very critical at this point of time, because without that, the second priority, which is very important, is to have progress and growth on SDG, because your sustainable development goals, because you're midway through the 2030 agenda. And if you're not able to accelerate that, the world, instead of progressing, has regressed. You need to accelerate the pace of implementation of that. And the third is about climate action and climate finance, because the developed world has not lived up to its commitment of providing adequate finance, which they had committed to $100 billion in 2009. But irrespective of that, there is a lot of finance available in the world. There are trillions of dollars available, but they are not able to flow because multilateral financial institutions are not able to bring in blended finance, credit enhancement, first loss guarantees, and which is critical. And that means that you need to reform the multilateral financial institutions, which is one of our key priorities. And the Prime Minister has talked about the lifestyle for sustainability, which is critical. That is changing behaviors of individuals and communities. And digital transformation and the digital public infrastructure that India has built up very strongly to transform lives of citizens across the world. And also women-led development, which to our mind is very, very important if growth and progress has to be achieved in the world.
Okay, you do mention some of these challenges in your book as well, and many congratulations for putting out this very timely book. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's got a lot of data, a lot of history, a lot of context. I want to refer to something that you've written in the book on how the 1990s saw a clear shift in policy making, and that's the shift that you saw in 2014. Can you tell us a little bit more about the policy shift that you refer to in the book? What has changed, in the trajectory of India's policy making? You do talk about India government playing a very proactive role and then handing it over to the private sector. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So, I've tried to trace back the history, the 75 years of business and enterprise in India. Before the British came in, we had about 25% of the global GDP. By the time they left, it had dwindled down to just about 5%. It had further, the industry and businesses were choked off because of the license Raj for a very long period of time. And then the 1991 moment came when there was liberalization, and it was essentially a regime change in terms of industrial policy, in terms of enabling manufacturing to grow and to allow, private businesses the freedom to produce and price their products, which was very important. And therefore, it took a little while, but then the growth of India accelerated because of allowing growth and competition and manufacturing output to take place. But the important thing was that a lot of procedural reforms, a lot of reforms around ease of doing business were still not there.
Sure.
And so when this government came in 2014, the emphasis was on a lot of reforms which are critical for sustained growth over a long period of time. The first and foremost of which I was associated was about ease of doing business and about scrapping a lot of rules, regulation, procedures, laws. The second was about opening up the foreign direct investment regime in a very big way. I think we overhauled completely the FDI, and it's important to understand that 95% of the FDI that comes in through the open route process. That is, you don't need approval at all. And thirdly, there was a vast range of reforms on patents and trademarks, etc.
Right.
But I think the important thing, Shweta, was that there were some very major reforms which were carried out. One of which was the Goods and Services Tax, which subsumed about 32 different acts and laws.
Right.
And then, the insolvency and bankruptcy code, which was very important because we never allowed businesses to die out. And this was very important. IBC was very critical. And thirdly, the Real Estate Regulation Act. And lastly, to my mind, the definition of MSME, which was pending for a long, long time, was redefined. But the most critical of all this was to bring the corporate tax to the on par with the world's best regime. And all this has made a huge difference to India's economic overall ecosystem. And to my mind, when the rest of the world gave out large packages, India during the COVID period pushed for digitization in a very big way. And the digitization that we've done of our economy has been enormous. And all these reforms and digitization and the digital transformation that we've undertaken in terms of providing identity, bank accounts, many other things, will enable India to leapfrog in a very big way. And you will see this in the next 2-3 decades, that India will make rapid progress forward and make a huge difference to the quality of lives of citizens.
Right. So you do write about in the book that the private sector now will play a transformative role in catapulting India's economy. We've the Prime Minister has referred to this period as the Amrit Kal, and you have laid a lot of emphasis on the participation of the private sector in driving innovation, in building globally recognized brands which will come out of India. I want to understand from you, what is driving your optimism for the private sector, considering in the last few years, in fact in the last decade or so, the private sector has been in the news for a lot of wrong reasons in terms of their corporate governance. They've not really upped their spending or investments into the country even when taxes were reduced. So I want to understand from you on, what's driving this optimism for the private sector.
So I'm a great believer that wealth creation is really the job of the private sector. The government's job is to do good policy making. It should be a facilitator, it should be a catalyst. Whichever country has grown in the last 5 decades actually has grown on the back of private sector. And therefore, I'm a great believer that it's very, very important to create environment where the private sector is able to grow and grow by leaps and bounds. And to my mind, if you look at what India has done in the last few years, if you look at including the digital transformation, we've allowed private sector to really innovate on top of the digital public layer that we've built up. So India is the only country where PhonePe competes with Google Pay, Paytm competes with WhatsApp. They're all competing in the marketplace, and that's why the digital transformation has taken place in terms of payments. Then you had another set of startups which started doing paperless, cashless credit. So you had Lending Card, Pine Lab, MobiKwik, all doing credit. And then you had another set of young startups. Look at Zerodha, Grow, Upstock, all of them doing wealth creation. I mean, a young company like Zerodha holding 28% of your stock market, which is totally digital in nature. And then you had another set of startups. Look at Digit, look at Acco. They started doing insurance, and you're able to get an insurance policy in 2 minutes flat rather than months and months, which used to take up when I was, relatively young. And therefore, what I have seen is a massive disruption that these young entrepreneurs have carried out. 2016, when the Prime Minister launched the Startup India movement, there were just 452 startups. Today you have about 90,000 plus startups in India, over 110 unicorns. These are people who are going to disrupt India in a very big way, and they're going to do transformative jobs. So the important thing to understand is that there's been a paradigm shift. You know, we have identity, we have bank accounts, we have data, we have AI, we have ML, and these young people will all use vast data. India is the only country in the world which provides you the size and scale of data, and your ability to acquire customers at a very low cost. The cost of acquisition of a customer is just $1 compared to about $150 in the United States of America. So the cost of acquisition has fallen very sharply in India. So your ability to innovate, your ability to bring size and scale, your ability to produce products to population scale at low cost is enormous in India.
No, that's you're absolutely right. As in, even in the manufacturing space, we're seeing a lot of activity. We're talking about made in India drones. We're talking about made in India wearables. So there is an explosion of sorts that's happening. Having said that, for them to scale to become global brands, I think would require a push from the government. So do you think that for instance, the strategy that China followed, and this is something that a lot of Indian startups also say, that they need some sort of protection from this global onslaught until they are strong enough to be able to withstand the competition that global giants bring in. Do you think that is the right way to go?
So I'm not a great believer in protectionism, but I'm a great believer in government providing the right infrastructure, which the Prime Minister has done in terms of the Gati Shakti, in terms of the Unified Logistic Interface Program, ULIP, what the Prime Minister has done in terms of creating 55,000 kilometers of roads, what the Prime Minister has done in terms of building houses, in terms of providing electricity, in terms of providing water connections. All that is the role of the government. But bringing in size and scale of manufacturing is the private sector's job. What the government has tried to do is to bring in production-linked incentive scheme, which assists the private sector to enhance their size and scale of manufacturing year after year, year after year, year after year for a period of 5 years. So what it says is only if you keep increasing your scale by 10%, 15%, 20%, 25% and become a global player, then we'll support you. If you fail to achieve your targets, we'll not support you. And that it's conditional on achieving success and for a limited period of 5 years. And the PLI is very important to understand this. It's not about protectionism. It's about assisting you to become export competitive. And that is that you must be able to penetrate global markets. And I'm saying this because every time India has grown, it's grown on the back of exports. So why I'm very particular about size and scale is because that will enable us to become productively efficient. That will enable us to become the least cost producer and efficiently to penetrate global markets, which is very important. And why this is important is because Indian manufacturers must think of the world as their market. And they must penetrate global markets. That's where the big bucks are.
So that means higher quality standards, very stringent enforcement of quality. You do talk about the environment in which India is looking at integrating itself into the global value chains. Comes at a very challenging time, at a time when the world is looking at reducing its carbon emissions. India has also set a target to reduce its carbon emissions, which is very different from how it happened in, say, a South Korea or a Japan or a China, where they did increase their carbon emissions to get their factories running and climbing up in the value chain. It's a very delicate balance. How do you think will India achieve this? It almost sounds counterintuitive that we have to reduce our carbon emissions and yet grow.
So the rest of the world, when it was growing, when it was industrializing, it was carbonizing the world. It's very important that when India industrializes, it must decarbonize.
Right.
And India must become the first country in the world to industrialize without carbonizing the world. And this to my mind, is not a challenge. This is an opportunity for India. Net zero is net positive for India. And companies and countries which go green are actually will be able to attract value, they'll be able to attract capital. Because you will be able to technologically leapfrog in many new areas of growth. What India has demonstrated is great ability in renewables. We do about 172 gigawatts. Our entrepreneurship is top class. Our climatic conditions are outstanding. And what these young entrepreneurs have demonstrated is that you are able to grow in size and scale in renewables. And the next lot of innovation will come in pump storage, battery storage, electric mobility, green hydrogen, and taking green hydrogen into petrochemical area. We can become the least cost producer of green hydrogen. We can become the biggest exporter of green hydrogen. We can become the cheapest manufacturer of electrolyzer. We have the size and scale to become the biggest pump storage country in the world. And these are massive opportunity for India to become the first country in the world to actually manufacture, industrialize, and decarbonize ourselves.
In fact, as you mentioned green hydrogen, the other day we had an event, a policy summit, where Mr. Gadkari came in a hydrogen-powered car, and I think that was a statement that he made. But you know, when we talk about and I do hope that you're right, that India does take the lead. Do you think our policies have been more visionary in nature when it comes to enabling this whole green revolution that you're looking at, or are we still playing catch up?
No, our policies in the last few years have been very, very visionary. We've been able to come out, the government has come out with the green hydrogen mission. It opened up the space policy for allowing young startups to get into rocket, satellite launching. We opened up the drone sector. We have opened up the geospatial map sector. Sectors after sectors after sectors have been opened up. And I think huge dismantling of rules, regulations have taken place to enable the private sector to leapfrog. And I think this is really the opportunity. And similarly on climate change, the whole possibility of India becoming a champion in green manufacturing, no other country in the world has which India has. No other country has the climatic conditions which India has. No other country has the best private sector entrepreneurs which India has. There's no way we should ever lose this opportunity. And I think we are heading towards being a huge transformational and a paradigm shift towards both electric mobility, battery storage, green hydrogen, all these are sunrise areas of growth for India.
But you know, while climate change is the need of the hour, some would say that putting the onus on India to reduce its carbon emissions at a time when India really needs to be firing on all cylinders. We have a lot of catching up to do. We're still a lower middle income country. Is it slightly unfair for the world to expect that India needs to take the lead in this? While I agree with you that it's an opportunity for India, however, that opportunity comes at a cost. We are still a developing country. We still have a lot of Indians who are living below the poverty line, who need to be brought up, who need jobs, who need higher incomes. So, is it a tad unfair for the world to expect India to take the lead?
No, what the world needs to do, and which has been agreed to in the name of climate justice in 2009, is that developed countries must provide the financial resources for India to leapfrog. It will not be possible if Indian entrepreneurs are not able to get 30 years lending, if they are not able to get instruments of hedging, which is available for 3 years but not for 30 years, if we are not able to get large pool of technical support for all this technology leapfrogging. And therefore, what many of these people say is that the developed world must live up to its commitment. But more than that, bring in a policy shift in multilateral financial institutions to enable a lot of money to flow in through blended finance, credit enhancement, and therefore you need a change of multilateral financial institutions, which will enable India to get a lot of more resources, 15x more than what it gets for us and our private sectors to leapfrog.
So, that would also entail reforms in India when it comes to getting financing, raising funding, and enabling startups, from a monetary, from a ease of financial transactions point of view, because even now a lot of startups choose to, say, register themselves in Singapore because they don't want to deal with the red tape that comes in India.
So a lot of reforms have been carried out, and that's why a lot of startups are actually coming back to India. A great example of that is PhonePe, which is a great example of that. I think a lot of regulatory easing up on startups has happened. We'll continue to do that throughout. But I really think that there's a need for a lot of Indian companies, Indian insurance, Indian pension funds, also to put in a lot of resources into Indian startups. The Indian insurance and pension fund is a very large pool of money. And I think once they start taking a little bit of risk by putting in money, just 2% of their total resources, that itself will be a very big catalyst. So should Indian family businesses put in resources into the Indian startup movement. And actually we need a fund for deep tech, for cutting edge areas like AI, ML, quantum, cloud. All these are robotics. All these are new areas of growth where you need far greater level of resources to flow in for young people who are disrupting the world of tomorrow.
You make a case for a complete withdrawal of government from running businesses, and whether it's mining, manufacturing, finance. These are the three areas that you mentioned. You make this case at a time when private sector is battling, certain credibility battles. We have governance issues that have been raised. We're also looking at a scenario where, Indians are paying for clean drinking water. We are paying a premium for education. We are paying a premium for healthcare, even though the government is in these sectors. Yet, a lot of Indians prefer to use, go to private schools or use private healthcare facilities. So, I want to ask you, has the private sector lived up to its promise? Or what do you think do they need to do to ride this wave? Because Prime Minister Modi had also said that at the time when he was elected, when he became the Prime Minister for the first time, that government has no business of being in business. But when you look at the private sector, there have been concerns that have been raised when it comes to transparency, when it comes to mis-selling, when it comes to just charging a premium. So I wanted to get your thoughts in on this.
So you look at the role of the government. The government's job is policy. Government's job is, in the last 8 years, it has provided about 30 million houses, which is like providing a house to every Australian. It's provided about 110 million toilets, which is like providing a toilet to every single German.
Right.
It's provided 243 million water pipe connections, which is like providing a water connection to every single person living in Brazil. It has provided, built about 55,000 kilometers of road, 1.5 diameters of earth, and it has actually provided health insurance to 500 million people. That's twice the size of the United States of America. So it has done what it had to do in terms of social sector. But business is truly the job of the private sector. Wealth creation is the job of the private sector. And I think the more we leave it, and that's why I'm a great believer that the national infrastructure pipeline, the national asset monetization pipeline, putting out well-structured projects which are de-risked into the marketplace is very, very important. And the private sector needs to be accelerated further and further, because in the long run, good policy framework will attract more and more private sector. We need not worry about 1 year, 2 year, but we are looking at a 30-year period of growth for India. Our challenge is not to grow at 6%. Our challenge is to grow at rates of 8 to 9 to 10% for a 3-decade period. We are looking at an Amrit Kal period of 2047. And for that to happen, you need to take the per capita income to very, very high levels of Indian.
But is the Indian private sector ready to take on this responsibility? Because, very recently there's a big business house which has been in the news because of concerns that have been raised by the Hindenburg Research on its governance and on the way the businesses were run. And that's not the only company. There have been several companies that have been in the news for the wrong reasons, whether it's in the banking space, whether it's in the manufacturing space. So what does the private sector need to do in terms of introspection, in terms of just rising to the occasion?
So for every 1 or 2 businesses which will be attacked, there'll be thousands of young businesses, young entrepreneurs who will work on the principles of good governance, good finances, good discipline, and actually ensure that businesses have good business models. So I think we should look at all the positives. We should look at all the top-class young entrepreneurs who've made India proud. And there are a vast number of them. And I'm sure that as we go ahead in the years, you'll see a vast number of young entrepreneurs. When I was growing up, there were no opportunities. There was an opportunity to only get into the government sector. But today there's an opportunity to be an entrepreneur, and then you'll see a vast range of young Indian entrepreneurs doing a vast range of disruption based on new technology, new digital models, new green models, and they will make India proud in the coming years.
Okay, I do hope you're right. You do mention in your book about the great disdain that India seems to have for its big businesses. And the political narrative has also been such, whether it is the Sood Boot Ki Sarkar jibe that Mr. Rahul Gandhi has often leveled at Mr. Modi, or just this whole narrative that how nation's wealth is being handed over to the private sector. While we might have come out of our socialist era and socialist policies, the mindset still remains somewhere, and that's why political parties keep building onto it.
Yeah, but it's very important to get the big size and scale. Without the big size and scale, you will not be able to produce at low costs. And without size and scale, you will not be able to create tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 producers, and therefore you will not be able to build up a strong MSME sector. And therefore, each one of the big companies that you build up in terms of size and scale actually helps you to build up a vast number of MSMEs at the back. A great example of that is the Maruti company, for instance, which has a huge number of component manufacturers here. And you will see this in every single sector, that the backward forward integration is very important. And if you have to penetrate global markets, size and scale is critical. I believe in Indian companies becoming big. I believe in Indian companies capturing global markets, and I have a great belief in Indian companies having the ability to become very productively efficient at low cost.
My last question, you put in a detailed calculation on what will it take for India to become a middle income country and then a higher income country. Your calculation says that if India grows at 6%, for the next 20-25 years, we will reach a $16 trillion economy, and then so on and so forth. So I want you to just tell us, by when will India come into the league of middle income and higher income countries?
No, so why I did that calculation was to basically tell the readers in a very simplistic way that there is a very huge power of the compounding power of growth. I was merely trying to explain that there is a difference between 6% rate of growth, 8% rate of growth, and a 10% rate of growth.
Right.
And that other countries in the past, despite all challenges, have achieved 10% rate of growth, and in our own country, Gujarat and Maharashtra have achieved this rate of growth. And if you want India to raise the per capita income, which to my mind is very important, that you need to take the per capita income of every Indian from $3,000 to $22,000. By the time we become 147 and make every Indian rich, you need to grow at high rates. And this is a doable proposition in India. But the challenge is that every single state of India will have to contribute. I mean, you have a vast range of states which are at very low levels and which need to grow across. So these states need to provide a huge thrust, and that will happen if these states focus on good urbanization and good manufacturing. We have a huge population. 42% of our population is working on informal jobs in the agricultural sector. Now, you can boost productivity in agriculture, but for that to happen, you need to reduce the total number of people in agriculture, and you need to take them out into urbanization and manufacturing. And therefore, states will have to play a very key and critical role if India is to grow at high rates over a long period of time.
Do you think the fact that this is a pre-election year will also help? You have G20 Presidency and you have it's a pre-election year. So these two things could really propel India into could play a role in propelling India further?
Well, I really think that in the last few years, good politics has demonstrated